He threw another orange brick at her, and it landed at her feet with a sad little squelch. "Penutter Ultra Pro Survival Ration," he said with a sense of pride, as if introducing a beloved pet. Jur blinked, her mind hardwired to imagine terrible things happening. Was that a ritual? His appearance betrayed his supposed role as a genocidal predator. He rested his elbows on his spherical device, which she assumed was a personal defense drone, and a faint blue shield buzzed whenever an insect threatened to bite. This device assuredly could withstand nuclear blasts, interdimensional collapses, and my Aunt Marcy's cooking. "Want some?" She stared at him, utterly horrified. "Right," he nodded wisely. "Cultural sensitivity. My bad." The awkward silence lingered. In the trees, a bird whose call sounded like a broken fax machine screeched into the night. Zur quavered, not from fear anymore, but from the absurdity of it all. Was this the human terror her people dreaded? An unruly party animal who couldn't help but crack poor jokes even in the face of danger. He didn't even look particularly monstrous. If anything, he looked tired, worn. There were dark shadows under his eyes, and a dent in his armor where some past battle had nearly crushed him. Finally, curiosity pried her lips apart. "What are you called?" she asked, her voice from disuse. He smiled broadly, as if she had presented him with a prize. "Leo Marsh, Sergeant, Earth United Coalition, at your underwhelming service." Jira watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend the meaning of half of those words. Sergeant Marsh, she thought to herself, like the swamp, only less wet and more socially awkward. Zur's corner of the mouth twitched against her better judgment, and Leo's smile grew even wider. He stood up, groaning theatrically, brushed the muck from his knees, and made an over-the-top bow that sent his helmet tumbling into a puddle. Zur couldn't control herself, and let out a small, startled laugh, audible in the thick jungle air. The human blinked at her, then clutched his chest dramatically. "Is that a laugh? My God, I've cracked the code. Quick, someone call the science directorate. I'm basically a diplomat now." His voice echoed through the clearing, startling the luminous moths from the trees. They rose in a shimmering, silent cloud, framing the ridiculous, bowing human in a halo of light. In that wild, unfathomable instant, something changed inside Jira. Perhaps the humans weren't as terrible as the old songs had foretold. Perhaps monsters sported ridiculous headgear, possessed an abundance of snacks, and spoke far too much. Perhaps the cosmos was stranger and larger than anyone had dared to imagine. And perhaps, just possibly, her demise was imminent. The fire crackled between them, a rare and stubborn thing that clung to life despite the dampness of the jungle air. Leo had somehow coaxed it into existence with a battered fire starter cube, a few muttered curses, and what Zur was fairly certain had been a bribe offered to the local fire spirits. Across from him, with her legs tucked under her, she sat with the peculiar orange ration still in her lap, her silver skin shimmering in the heat of the flames, and the tips of her long ears catching the flickering light like polished crystal. Leo, meanwhile, was busy tinkering with a device the size of his palm, tapping it rhythmically against his knee. The object appeared to be a communicator, but its occasional electrical zaps to his fingers gave the impression that it wasn't happy. Looking up, he asked, "Do you have a name, or do I just keep calling you?" Jer hesitated, knowing that names held great significance for her people. Each syllable carried 1,000 whispered hopes and a wealth of history. "Sir," she said with care, causing the Z to hum like a moth's wing. Leo nodded in appreciation, then promptly messed it up. "Seeker got it." In Velmeran culture, a person's laughter was possibly more intimate than their name. Cultural exchange, she reminded herself grimly, despite her internal cringe. Leo sighed and put away the sparking device. All right, sir. Since we're going to be stuck here for a while, let's establish some ground rules. Rule 1. If you see me running, you should definitely be running too. The second rule states that anything that glows blue is safe to eat. Red is not so great, and green is a coin toss. The third rule states that you should never eat anything that giggles when you pick it up. She blinked at him, confused. He insisted that this rule applies everywhere. Giggles indicate sentience, and sentience means lawsuits. The ridiculousness of it made her smile again before she could stop herself. Leo's smile was so bright, it could light a furrow. Tis reached into a side pouch and tossed her something else, this time wrapped in thin foil. Zara instinctively grabbed it and peeled it open to reveal something that looked like compressed energy bread, with a faint smell of nuts and desperation. A sad brick that keeps you alive, though. Jer wrinkled her nose at the smell. Regret. Leo slapped his knee and cackled, saying, "You've got the spirit already?" Spirit. She reluctantly took a tiny bite, and it tasted like peanuts introduced to a tire in a crowded room. A patrol drone's whine sliced through the night, and although both of them tensed instinctively, Leo casually leaned back, tilting his head to track the sound, and said, "Recon model." Above them, the twin moons of Velmora 9 inched higher, casting overlapping shadows that danced among the trees. Not a threat, unless it spots a large heat signature. Lucky for us, this little fire is shielded. Jer tilted her head, shielded. How? Leo tapped his wristband, and a holographic interface flared into existence. Pale blue lines tracing the air like lazy fireflies. Nanomi mesh generator projects a thermal dampening field, makes us look like a couple of rocks. To anything scanning from above, in spite of her disbelief, she couldn't help but stare in awe at the technology. Her people had no idea what fusion drives were, much less nanomesh. Leo smiled at her expression and said, "Yeah, we're fancy." Zer frowned and asked, "What's a watermelon?" Leo blinked. For the next 15 minutes, you unfortunate deprived soul sat through Leo's ever more ridiculous panime attempts to define a watermelon. He used a plethora of hand gestures, a few misguided sound effects, and finally he drenched himself with his canteen in an attempt to mime juicy refreshingness. By the end, Zer was laughing so hard her sides hurt, and Leo was thoroughly soaked and looking deeply satisfied with himself. "See?" he said, wringing out his sleeve. "Diplomacy, one ridiculous metaphor at a time." Jer's laughter faded into a smile. She studied him in the firelight, the easy grin, the scuffed armor, the faint weariness behind his jokes. He resembled more of a child than the human monsters from her grandmother's stories. He appeared to have been given terrible weapons and snacks, and told to make the most of it. Suddenly, a sharp beeping noise cut him off. Leo frowned and checked his wristband. He muttered something about patrols sweeping wider. "The time is running out." Zer tensed up in an instinctual way, but Leo calmly waved a hand and said, "Relax, I've got a plan." The plan consisted of 3 steps: moving camp, avoiding capture, and making profit. Zer arched an eyebrow at the word profit, and Leo admitted that the 3rd step was mostly about emotional profit, a sense of accomplishment, maybe even a self-happiness, while he stood grunting audibly popped his joints. Leo retrieved his helmet from the puddle, shook it out, and reinstalled it on his head with a resigned sigh. The squelching sound resounded more loudly than it should have. Jira stood up as well, holding the orange ration close to her heart, like a talisman. The jungle swayed and murmured around them, the glowing plants gradually fading, as if sensing the tension. "Well," he offered her his hand, prepared to plunge headfirst into dubious decision-making. Jer stared at his extended hand, her mind racing with a plethora of stories, a mix of old fears, new possibilities, and the peril of trusting others made her nervous. But then again, laughter was a safe haven, and he had given her that tonight. She cautiously placed her hand in his. The giggling plants resumed their whispering somewhere behind them, as if already betting how long these two moron fugitives would survive. A fire, a terrible ration bar, and the first threads of trust bound these two unlikely fugitives together. Leo's smile was sufficient. It seemed like Zero's soldierly talents did not include stealth, because every time Leo stepped on something that cracked, squished, or shrieked in protest. Zero winced. They moved through the jungle like a couple of inebriated cats, quietly enough not to wake the really dangerous things, but loud enough to earn a few dirty looks from the less ambitious predators. "This planet really needs a volume knob," Leo whispered as he swatted at a vine that was trying to encircle his boot. "Every step is a symphony of horror." Zur looked around exhausted. The plants seemed to be listening. "Good," Leo said, and pulling himself away. "Perhaps they will learn their lesson and stop playing with my shoes." They continued their slog, the ground becoming firmer under their feet, as the dense jungle gave way to towering crystalline structures that protruded from the soil like shattered swords. The shard fields were tales that Jera had only heard told her about. They were a cemetery for ancient battles, fought long before her people had ever left their home valleys. Under the moon's twin lights, the structures pulsed faintly, and when the wind was just right, they sang. It was a beautiful and haunting sight, but as Leo pointed out, it was a terrible place to nap, but a fantastic place to twist an ankle and die dramatically. Jera shot him a look. Over a cluster of sharp, glass-like spines, he cheerfully remarked, "You speak too much. I prefer to think of it as providing essential commentary." Zir smiled, despite herself, and he was ridiculous. Some people would pay good credits for a tour guide like me. 5-star reviews would stumble into doom again. Leo fiddled with his wristband again, projecting a dome of low-frequency static around them as they squeezed into a narrow crevice between two massive shards shielded from overhead scanners and, more importantly, the jungle's more inquisitive fauna. The space was just wide enough for them to sit shoulder to shoulder. "A signal jammer," he explained, imitating the sounds of local wildlife. "So if you hear a mating call that sounds like a blender choking on gravel," he said, "that's us." "Very typical." Jera shook her head, her long silver hair brushing against the shard wall. She absent-mindedly tucked it behind her long ears, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. Leo removed a small device from his pack, a projector in the shape of a flattened orb, and placed it on the ground between them. A few taps later, a holographic map appeared showing their position as a blinking green dot surrounded by a sea of menacing red markers. Being this close to a human, even a friendly one felt dangerous, not because he was a threat, but because he wasn't. That was the truly terrifying part. "All right," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "Our extraction point's about 15 kilometers west past the Colinthrane. Only problem is, that's currently crawling with folks who'd very much like to give me an aggressive handshake with bullets." Jer tilted her head. "What is a bullet?" Leo blinked, then mimed a tiny object flying through the air. She said, "Your people are strange." He mumbled something about space travel, before decent coffee, and zoomed in on the map. "Regardless, we can't just stroll in because there's too much patrol activity. So we'll take Plan B and head north into the dead zone, skirting the edges of the shard fields. There are no sensors there because, well, things have a tendency to explode." Zir scowled. "Expand," he said with such casualness that Zur wasn't sure if he was joking or not. Leo tapped the side of the map until it folded away, and Zur decided it was probably safer not to ask. The small projector retracted into its compact sphere and rolled obediently back into his palm. "You ever think about how weird this all is?" he asked, voice softer. "I mean, two species meeting on a battlefield, and instead of shooting each other, we're sitting in a hole, swapping bad jokes and ration bars." Zur thought about how the song described it, and Leo couldn't help but laugh. "Songs?" Leo asked. "What did they say?" Zur's seriousness told him that the song predicted wearing bones as armor, blood-dripping teeth, and dancing on the remains of the weak. Leo snorted so hard that he coughed violently, technically wheezing, but he still couldn't help but laugh. Halloween is an old Earth tradition where people dress up as monsters to scare each other. It's a fun time with lots of candy. If the galaxy tried it, there would probably be a lot less wars. I dance badly, but only at weddings. And I haven't worn bones since that one Halloween party, and I swear it was tasteful. She arched an eyebrow. Zur tensed up as he spoke, and Leo nodded. "You know, maybe we are monsters sometimes, but sometimes we're just idiots trying to survive." He leaned back against the shard wall and looked up at the tiny slice of star-strewn sky visible between the towering crystals. His voice had become quieter. "If you think about it," he said, "in those moments we can be the ones to distribute sweets instead of bullets, or to discover allies in the very spot where we were meant to perish." Leo reached into his pack once more and withdrew two small rectangular bars, distinct from the orange ones, after a long period of silence, during which the shard fields hummed gently around them, their melodies peculiar and melancholy. He handed her one and said it was chocolate. "Real honest to goodness chocolate, not ration, trash," he said. Jira cautiously, suspiciously, unwrapped it. The aroma hit her immediately. Rich, sweet, dizzyingly unfamiliar. She cautiously bit into it, and her world exploded, thankfully not literally, but the taste, the sheer unearthly joy of it made her ears twitch in amazement and her eyes widen. Leo observed her reaction as if she were a proud parent displaying her child's first spaceship drawing. "Welcome to humanity's greatest contribution to the universe," he exclaimed. Jira, her dignity shattered, licked melted chocolate from her fingers. The first to awaken on Mora 9 was Leo, who moaned as he wrenched himself from the shard wall where he had slouched all night, accompanied by a symphony of suspicious rustling and the distinct aroma of alien mold baking. Under the twin suns. Perhaps she believed the songs had omitted something crucial. Perhaps kindness was more alien than cruelty after all. A very persistent vine had braided itself around his boot, and his hair was flying in all directions. Zur was already awake, hunched over the entrance to their little crystal alcove, her long ears twitching to pick up the faintest sounds. In the bluish dawn, she appeared eerily serene, like a statue carved from moonlight, until she turned to Leo and deadpanned. Leo threw his arms wide and rubbed his face. "You snore like a wounded cracklith. Sleep safe with Sir Snorlot," she said without blinking, tucking a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "I do not snore. I simply breathe with enthusiasm. You scared away 3 nocturnal predators and 2 potential mates." Leo gathered their limited supplies as Zur scouted ahead, her movements barely visible among the towering crystals. She seemed at home in this strange and dangerous environment, and the light caught on the tips of her long ears, creating subtle rainbows on the shard walls. Leo, on the other hand, felt like a very inept tourist who had misplaced his guide and was about to be eaten alive by something with too many fangs. Upon her return, she was scowling. There was movement, small patrols. They were expanding their circle. Leo muttered a curse word under his breath. They were now sweeping the dead zone faster than I had anticipated. His eyes widened as he retrieved the holographic map and observed their escape route shrivel up beneath the invading red fields. Their green dot blinked like a desperate heartbeat. "All right," he muttered, putting the projector back into his backpack. "Plan B." We now cut straight across the unstable zone, a fast and chaotic crossing. "I thought you said the unstable zone explodes sometimes." Leo shrugged and said, "Only sometimes." She gave him a good look before asking, "Do all humans have such poor instincts?" He grinned and said, "Only the best ones." They started moving quickly, weaving between the crystalline monoliths as the sun climbed higher. In spite of the oppressive heat, Leo's suit kept him cool with subtle hums and irritated beeps, as if it hated having to work so hard to ensure his survival. Upon entering the unstable zone, they could see the air shimmering with strange energies, and the ground beset with sinkholes that emitted a faint blue glow. Leo kept his wristband sensor wide open, scanning constantly. "Watch your step," he said, hopping over a small fissure that promptly belched a puff of neon gas. Zero followed nimbly, although her long ears twitched nervously at every new noise. The plants here grew in unsettling spirals, and every so often a shard would blow itself into glittering dust. "This place," she said, wrinkling her nose, "smells like burnt sorrow." "Yeah," Leo said, "and Tuesday mornings back on Earth." They were almost through the worst of it when a series of low rumbles shook the ground beneath their feet. Leo froze. "Oh, oh, oh, oh," Zur echoed sharply. "You said, oh, that is not a phrase of confidence." "Yeah, well, neither is." "We're about to meet a magma worm," Leo muttered, spinning around. Sure enough, a portion of the ground behind them was bulging upward, cracked spider webbing outwards with alarming speed. A glowing form like a dragon made entirely of molten rock and bad intentions burst free, roaring a sound that rattled Leo's teeth. "Oh, good," Leo said brightly, already backing up. "It's awake. Great love, that for us." Jira drew a slender blade from her belt, its edge humming with an energy field that made the air around it shimmer. "Can it be killed, technically?" Leo said, scanning the beast with his wristband. "Yes, practically we'd need like a tank." Or a very persuasive argument. The magma worm slammed its tail into the ground, sending shards flying. Leo yelped and grabbed Zur's hand. "New plan!" he shouted. Running! They sprinted, dodging geysers of molten rock and unstable patches of ground. Behind them, the worm gave enthusiastic chase, despite its considerable size. "This is your fault," Jira yelled, leaping over a sinkhole. "My fault," Leo panted. "I didn't invite it. It's not like I sent a magma saying, 'Come eat us.'" Jir laughed breathlessly, half terror, half exhilaration. They were moving faster than should have been possible, adrenaline giving wings to their steps. Ahead, Leo spotted Salvation, a narrow fissure between two massive shards, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Without slowing, he veered toward it, dragging Zur behind him. They dove through the gap just as the worm slammed into the shard wall with an earth-shaking boom. Dust and heat blasted through the fissure, but they made it to the other side, collapsing in a heap on the cool ground. Leo lay there, gasping for a long moment. "Well," he said hoarsely, "that was cardio." Zur rolled onto her side, silver hair plastered to her face with sweat, and gave him a look that could have incinerated a lesser man. "If we survive this," she said, "I will teach you what proper caution looks like." "I look forward to it," Leo wheezed. They climbed unsteadily to their feet, the rumbling dying away behind them. The magma worm, apparently uninterested in pursuing prey that had slipped away so narrowly, returned to whatever miserable hobby it had had before Leo dusted himself off, checked his scanner again, and grinned. "Good news," he said. "We're almost at the ravine." "Bad news? Well, you know what? Let's skip the bad news for now." Zur groaned. "I am learning, Humain. I am learning that your plans always come with bad news." Leo winked part of my charm. They set off again, hearts still hammering, moving toward the yawning chasm that marked the last major obstacle between them and freedom. Overhead, the twin suns burned mercilessly, but somewhere beyond that horizon waited a ship, a sky, and a future neither of them could have imagined if they survived a little longer, and if Leo didn't stumble into any more magma worms. The odds, Jera thought grimly, were not exactly encouraging, but somehow, for the first time, she wasn't entirely afraid. The ravine yawned before them like the gaping M of some colossal beast, a sheer drop into a swirling mist that seemed to churn with a mind of its own. Leo peered over the edge and immediately took a cautious step back, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well," he said, voice falsely bright. "On the plus side, no magma worms. On the minus side, gravity still works." Jur crouched near the cliff's edge, examining the brittle, glittering rocks that formed a narrow trail, snaking down into the fog. Her silver hair lifted slightly in the rising thermals, giving her a halo of starlight. "This is our way?" she asked. Skepticism thickened her voice. Leo nodded, pulling a small, battered grappling device from his belt. He tossed it lightly in his hand. "Good old Grippy. Never failed me yet." "Grippy," Jira repeated. "You can't expect a man to dangle over a death pit and not name his equipment," Leo said, mock offended. "That's just bad luck." Jer sighed, ears twitching in amused disbelief. "Your people are impossible." "That's why we survived," Leo said, flashing a grin. "Too stubborn to die properly." Together they rigged a line across the ravine mouth, Leo anchoring the device into the shard stone while Zur tested the tensile strength with a warrior's practicality. When she deemed it sufficient, or at least survivable, they prepared to cross. Zur went first, moving with graceful precision, her body a series of careful calculations. Leo, on the other hand, clambered after her with all the elegance of a particularly determined walrus. Halfway across the line, groaned ominously. "Please don't break Grippy," Leo muttered under his breath. "I'll get you cleaned. I'll even oil your joints." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Jira said, her smirk visible on her lips as she crossed to the other side first. "You are a creature of chaos," she added. Her arms folded. Leo, panting, grinned and flopped onto solid ground after a final graceless scramble. He lay there for a while, arms outstretched, gasping for air as he struggled to breathe in the thin electric air. "Remind me," he wheezed, "to put professional rope dancer on my resume." Jira reached out a hand to him, and he blinked up at her in surprise before taking it. She effortlessly helped him to his feet. Up ahead, the ground sloped gently upward, and they could finally make out the peak through the thinning mist. Leo let out a long breath as they approached the final stretch of their journey. The patrols would have noticed the line crossing soon, and they would have had very little time before reinforcements came. They could make out the silver glint of a small shuttle sitting on the far side of a wide grassy basin. The shuttle appeared battered with a few panels missing, or held in place by stubborn bolts. But it was complete, and theirs. While they ran, Zir's thoughts wandered, which was unusual, considering the circumstances. She recalled the childhood tale she had heard. Humans are monsters, the embodiment of all nightmares. However, The man who ran alongside her, apologizing to his boots every so often and tripping over imaginary obstacles, was not a monster. He was naive. He was reckless. He was kind. They reached the shuttle just as the first warning shots whined through the air. Leo flung himself at the hatch, slapping the activation pad so hard he nearly left a handprint. The ship's AI, groggy from its long sleep, booted up with a series of reluctant beeps. Yes, I know," Leo said, ducking inside. "Emergency evac priority 1, save the witty hero and his surprisingly competent new friend." Jira slipped inside after him, scanning the interior with sharp eyes. It was cramped, messy, but serviceable. She marveled at the strange clutter. Odd trinkets in mementos taped to the walls. A hand-drawn picture of a dog wearing a tiny space helmet made her pause. "Is this art?" she asked. Leo laughed as he powered up the engines. "That's Benny Best's space pup in the quadrant." The shuttle shuddered as it powered up. Outside, the enemy closed in, but they were too late. The small ship sprang into action with a rumble of protesting thrusters, leaving a trail of dust and debris behind it, juxtaposed with Leo, who yelled out in triumph. Jir was able to breathe freely for the first time in days as they soared through the mist, the ground crumbling beneath them. We had survived the worst vacation spot on Earth. As they drew near the orbiting carrier ship, the Wayfarer's luck. A ragged but beautiful wreck, Jira watched him with a curious and buoyant heart. She didn't know everything about humans just yet, but she did know enough to know that the old songs had been incorrect. Leo piloted the shuttle toward the ship, and Zir noticed dozens of humans gawking, arguing and laughing on the decks. "You don't have to stay," Leo said, his usual grin softened by something more compassionate. "I can find you a safe drop-off point if you want to go home." Jir hesitated, thinking about returning to a place where suspicion lurked behind every smile. Instead, they appeared normal, messy, loud, and alive, where kindness was rationed like water, where she would always be the one who had trusted the enemy. Or here, among loud, stubborn beings who named their ropes and survived on bad jokes, and worse, coffee. Among people who might not be perfect, but who offered something rarer than perfection. Hope, as she glanced at Leo, a small, fierce smile spread across her face. "I think," she said, "I will stay for a while." Leo's face lit up with excitement. "Awesome!" Zir smiled even wider. "You're going to love it!" They embarked on a new life together, stepping through the docking hatch. The Wayfarer's luck brought forth an old jukebox that belted out a tune that was older than them. The song was about journey's mistakes and finding family in the most unexpected places. Jira thought it was a good song, a very good beginning, and the end. It was a bond formed not out of fear but trust and choice.